All right, if you want to read this article, you can go to justinstellman.com/A10. Christianity is crazy. The definition of crazy, as per dictionary.com, is mentally deranged, especially as manifested in a wild or aggressive way. That doesn't tell me much, so I looked up the word deranged, and it came up as such, mad or insane. Then I looked up insane, which came up as in a state of mind that prevents normal perception, behavior, or social interaction, seriously mentally ill. Now we're getting somewhere. Well, kind of. Depends on what is considered to be normal. By calling Christianity crazy, does that mean I don't think the concepts outlined in Christianity are true? Nope. Is it possible for something that is crazy to also be true? Of course it is. Just because I give my opinion about what I think it is, does that mean my opinion that, i.e. Christianity is crazy, is also true? It does not. Whenever people make statements like Christianity is crazy, there are two layers really to unpack. One is whether the charge is true or not, and the other is that if the charge is true, does that make the message itself any less true? I think lots of things are crazy. I think it's crazy people eat processed food and look at their cell phone while they drive. I think it's crazy that people work their entire lives in a job they hate. I think it's crazy that people jump out of perfectly good airplanes. Just because I think those things are crazy, does that mean that they don't exist or that they're not true or that they don't happen? Remember, we're after truth here, not opinions. So although I'm saying, and it is my opinion, that Christianity is crazy, it has nothing to do whether or not it's true. So my introduction to Christianity. For the first 15 years of my life, I grew up in a relatively non-Christian household. When I was about 10 or so, my parents enrolled us in Awana. Awana stands for, I love this, Approved Workmen Are Not Ashamed. It's a mix between the Boy Scouts and church. The reason my parents enrolled us was to keep us from making friends who would be a bad influence on us. Subsequently, my parents ended up attending the church where the Awana meetings took place, but their involvement at the time wasn't much more than going to church on Sunday mornings. It wasn't until I was a sophomore in high school that I started attending Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, and eventually went to school there. No surprise I ended up accepting Jesus into my heart during that time. Funny how that works, right? As far as I know, that phrase, accepting Jesus into your heart, is never really mentioned in our versions of the Bible. Also, the idea that you must accept Jesus into your heart in order to go to heaven is also a relatively new concept that wasn't even a part of the early church vernacular. But be that as it may, that's what I did. And I went full hog plus the postage with this new idea of Christianity. It was my way of rebellion. It was me against the world. Or me and Jesus against the world. Christians love to make themselves look counterculture and recruit you to be on the side of the downtrodden and marginalized. The truth is that the Christian right in America is deeply embedded into politics, and they are a very powerful group. I did mission work overseas. I taught Bible studies on public school campuses during lunch during my senior year. I went to retreats, and I even witnessed, i.e. told people they were going to hell unless they accepted Jesus into their hearts. All when I was about 16 years old. Boy, did I have the world figured out. When I graduated high school, I even did mission work for 3 months in Hungary. Those poor people apparently really needed a 17-year-old know-it-all kid to tell them their lives were meaningless without Jesus. Looking back, I can't believe how arrogant and confused I was. A 17-year-old kid should not be traveling to other countries thinking he has life all figured out, telling people how to live and how to think. I was a privileged white American male child. What did I know? I didn't know how the real world worked. I didn't know the real life struggles people had. I didn't know the history of politics of a nation before I went. All I knew was to tell them about Jesus. If you're going to send your kid off to foreign lands, at least teach them about the history of the area where they're going to be traveling to. Please? The whole thing was ridiculous. Then I came back and worked at the church as a budding and aspiring youth pastor for 3 years. I prided myself in biblical knowledge and apologetics. I wanted to debate anybody I could about the historicity and accuracy of these ancient texts I clung on to out of sheer fear. I even went to Mormon churches and engaged in heated debates about theology. I was praised by the church for doing this. I was 18 then, so I really knew what was going on in the world, didn't I? After about 3 years, though, I had had enough. I decided to quit and get into computers by the prompting of a good friend. Apparently, the, quote, internet was becoming some sort of a thing. I cut off all ties with the inner workings of churches and joined Team Apostate. Around 20 or 21, I met a local guy here in town who talked to me about ancient civilizations. He was both fascinated by them and fascinating himself. He knew so much. He was an ex-Christian, yet he very strongly believed in God. How could this be? How could a guy as knowledgeable as he was not be a Christian yet still believe in God? It just didn't compute. His passion opened my eyes to these ancient structures around the world that apparently I wasn't taught much about in school, which is shocking. What I gathered from him was that there's a heck of a lot more going on than we will ever know. Because of learning from him, I've been heavily researching ancient cultures and civilizations as well as esoteric knowledge for the past 20 years. And the more I looked at the stories in the Bible, the more I caught myself scratching my head wondering how all that logical, reasonably intelligent people believed all the stories in there. They didn't just believe in them in an allegorical sense. To them, it was literal. These were educated men with white hair wearing suits and ties. They were respected members of the community. They were sane, logical, and rational. Everybody believed this stuff. Maybe I was just weird for questioning it. Just because everyone believes something and it's, quote, normal doesn't make it true, because truth stands alone. There are lots of things considered to be normal in our society today that I don't think should be normal. For example, it's normal to have a cell phone. It's normal to drive cars. It's normal to eat fast food. It's normal to have tattoos. It's normal to watch television and play video games. It's normal to be in debt, and it's normal to get a job. But normal, societal norms are subjective and relative. When you choose to eat a healthy diet and maybe go get a colonic, people look at you like you're crazy. They start asking you questions that make you look stupid because what you're doing doesn't fall in line with the safe worldview they've been programmed with. They're afraid, so their only defense mechanism is to try to make you look unintelligent so they can feel safe again. Societal norms and social norms can change and vary with each new generation and the growth of technology. Look at how our societal norms have changed since the early 1990s when the internet first came onto the scene. The social justice warriors are in full force, and just about everything you say could be taken as offensive. Even universities are teaching kids to use non-gendered pronouns when referring to people so they won't be offended. Social mores change with the times. What's normal today won't be normal in 100 years from today. There was an interesting quote I read recently that said, "You can only know your own experience. Everything else is programming." Now consider that for a moment. Consider what that means. From a philosophical perspective, I can't know that quote to be true because I haven't experienced it. But if you accept it as true, that means we don't know if the buildings in New York on 9/11 came down or if it was just programming. I mean, how do I know? I wasn't there. Were you? If you were there and saw it happen, then it's true for you, but for me, it's programming. It doesn't mean it's not true. It's just that for me, it's programming. Programming, again, is separate from truth, but it can be the same. Remember, truth stands alone. Just because it's programming doesn't necessarily mean that the programming is true or untrue. They are two distinctly different things. But what it means for me is that since I didn't experience 9/11 in person, all I can say that I know about it comes from programming. I've watched tons of documentaries about it, and I heard the official stories, but all of that is just programming also. If that quote is accurate, then the same holds true for everything else in your life. But the question is, do you want to admit that you've been programmed? What about the stories in the Bible? Did they actually happen? Who wrote them and why? Was there an agenda going on that we don't know about? When were they written, and are they accurate? You see, I believe Christians have hijacked what it means to be normal. What they don't want to admit is the possibility of other information also being true, or God forbid, they being wrong. I read the Bible front and back about 3 times and studied it as well. I'm no Bible scholar. So this isn't coming from someone who hasn't even read the entire 66 books. It's also not coming from someone who has an animosity towards the Bible, Christians, or even Christianity. All I'm saying is that you have to admit the Bible is hard to believe and quite strange. It's asking a lot to believe these stories. And not only that, to base our entire eternal destination on a book that contains these stories is a bit odd, don't you think? If every word in the Bible is God-breathed and God-inspired, why wouldn't God have had enough foresight to save the original copies? If heaven and hell were in the balance for all eternity, why have any stories in the Bible that would have even remotely caused people not to believe it? If in fact they could go to hell forever for not doing so. If I were God, I would have made the Bible absolutely bulletproof. If you're a Christian, I know what you're thinking, but I mean bulletproof in the sense that there would be no stories in there that were hard to believe. I wouldn't leave it up to conjecture or interpretation. If you read the book of Revelation or any other book of the Bible for that matter, each verse can mean dozens of different things. So why be so cryptic and non-specific? If our eternal souls are hanging in the balance, why have so much mystery surrounding the book that tells me I'll go to hell if I don't believe it? Again, that doesn't mean it's not true. Those are just my opinions. If God created us and the universe in 7 days like it says, He can do whatever He wants. So who am I to judge the Creator? All I'm saying, with my warped understanding and fallen nature, to steal a phrase from Christianity, is that the Bible is crazy, but that's okay. At the end of the day, we all believe crazy things and have to accept the words of other people about important topics that include life, death, and eternity. What you believe about me is none of my business because your belief is your subjective reality. I'm only a secondary character in the drama that is your movie. But what I'm saying is that don't call me nuts if I believe in astral projection, past lives, reincarnation, the flat earth, or aliens that live in hyperdimensions. I'm telling you, it's all crazy. It's all nuts. Let's just accept the fact that we all believe crazy things. Normal is subjective and relative. Below, I'm going to share just a handful of preposterous stories from the Bible. Just because I have the opinion they are absurd doesn't mean they aren't true. That's up for you to decide. 31 bizarre stories in the Bible. Noah's Ark. Apparently, Noah rounded up 2 of every living thing that existed on the earth. How did he get polar bears or creatures from the other side of the world to come to him? The walls of Jericho. Apparently, the massive stone walls that weighed thousands of pounds all fell down, not just one wall, mind you, all of them at the same time, from the sound of a single trumpet. Jonah in the belly of a giant fish. Jonah lived for 3 days and 3 nights inside the belly of a whale. What did he eat? How did he breathe? How did he survive the stomach acid? People living for 800 years. No explanation is given as to why or how they lived that long. That would be good information to know, don't you think? Balaam's donkey talks to him. Somehow, a donkey is able to speak a particular language. It just so happened to be Hebrew, which just so happened to be the same language Balaam spoke. If this were to happen, the donkey's brain would need to be changed in order to accommodate the ability to speak and understand language. After the event, did its brain return to normal, or could it speak Hebrew for the rest of its life? Elisha kills 2 boys. Elisha killed 2 teenage boys because they were making fun of his bald head. But he had a bear come out of the woods to do the dirty deed himself, so all is well, unless, of course, you were the mom or the dad of one of those boys. But it's okay, though, because this happened thousands of years ago, so that makes everything okay. How did he communicate to the bear to come to his location? Then how did he tell the bear to kill? Did Elisha feel bad afterwards? The Apostle Paul raises a guy from the dead. A man falls asleep during his apparent boring sermon and falls out of a window, but Paul brings him back to life and forgives him for falling asleep. Strange, right? People lived in the desert for 40 years eating only one thing, manna. This one food kept millions of Jews alive for that long of a time. How come they didn't become intolerant or allergic to this food? Did God manipulate their intestines to be able to accept this manna for 40 years? And why aren't we ever told what, in fact, the manna was? Another thing that would be nice to know. Samson kills a bunch of people. Samson killed over 1,000 Philistines with the jaw of a donkey. How did that happen? Were there magical powers in the infamous donkey jaw, or did God allow all the killing to be made possible by himself? If the latter, why did a donkey have to die in order for more killing to occur? 3 guys get burned alive. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego get thrown into a pizza oven and don't burn for some reason. Aside from the Holocaust detractors out there, do you think that God could have stepped in and when people were being killed by Hitler? Strange. Astrology in the Bible say it isn't so. 3 magicians follow the astrological stars that point to where Jesus was born. We'd prefer to avoid talking about astrology in the Bible. It kind of goes against the entire message, unless, of course, the stars will lead you to Jesus. And by the way, what happened to those stars? Were they simply created or destroyed for that purpose? Or did they simply get swallowed up shortly thereafter by the precession of the equinox? We'll never know. The entire sea opens up. Moses parted the Red Sea when leading people out of the land of oppression. Did the event look like it does in the picture above? For how long was it parted? Did it take a long time for it to part, or was it instant? When it was actually parted, how high were the walls, and was there sea life on the ground in the middle? All information I'd love to know. The sun stands still for an entire day. In the 10th chapter of the book of Joshua, apparently the sun and moon stood still for 24 hours. Do we have accounts from other ancient civilizations about this? How could the sun stand still if the earth revolves around it? Shouldn't it read the earth stood still? How did that affect the calendars, since one day would have affected the entire numbering system? A bunch of people ate massive amounts of fish. Thousands of people were fed with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, until they were all full. What were the mechanics of this? Were people becoming hungry from eating a tiny morsel of a bite? Did they cook the fish and then cut it up and only to realize it had multiplied? Did it multiply during the preparation process, or was it actually handed out to people? Jesus walked on water and was resurrected. After 3 days, Jesus rose again from the grave. Why didn't they bury him in the ground? Instead, they put him in a cave. He also walked on the surface of water. Did he know the entire time that he wouldn't sink? Demons gone wild. Demons got exorcised from a local crazy person and apparently didn't like being disembodied, so they went into some nearby pigs and then killed themselves by jumping off a cliff. This would only facilitate the need to find new bodies to enter into. The time between being ordered out of the man to entering the pigs was very short. This could only mean that they had to act quick. After the pigs died, did they realize they had made a mistake since they had to go find new bodies to possess? Is it possible for demons to feel guilty over mistakes? God changes his mind in the Old Testament. In Exodus chapter 32, it says that God changes his mind about the harm he said he'd do to his people. This kind of vacillation is also mentioned in 1 Samuel chapter 15, where God apparently regrets making Saul a king because he doesn't carry out what God tells him to do. How can an all-knowing, omniscient God regret anything or change his mind about something? That doesn't make any sense to me. Build it and they will come, or not. God grew fearful and changed the language of the whole earth to stop the Tower of Babel from being built. This was in the days of Peleg when, quote, the earth was divided, whatever that means. Was that a reference to Pangea? Again, we'll never know. But what was God so angry about here? Was Babel actually going to be a stairway to heaven as described literally? If so, how is that going to be built with limited resources at the time? How come there are no real explanations about this? Are we all supposed to not ask any questions about such important matters? Mary was impregnated by, wait for it, God. A 13-year-old girl was actually impregnated by God. Does that mean God had sex before marriage? Or did God have incest, since all of his creation are his children? What were the scientific mechanisms that made this even possible? Again, we'll never know. You are the salt of the earth, literally. Lot's wife in the book of Genesis was turned into a pillar of salt for simply looking behind her at the city. Why salt? Why not any other substance? Did the pillar stand upright, or was it more of a pile of salt? Isn't it a bit unfair to not even allow her to plead her case? She was instantly turned into salt just for looking back. Jesus turns water into wine. Did he command the water to become wine? Did other people see him do it? How did the wine taste? How much water turned into wine? Did people get drunk from that wine? If so, was Jesus responsible for their drunkenness? Good question. Gold coins in the mouth of a fish. Who made those gold coins? Was the fish also created for this purpose, or did God use an existing one? How many coins were in its mouth? Why did God save Peter from being late on his taxes? If God knew this story would make it into the Bible, which he must have, and that it would be hard for rational people to buy into, why is it included when heaven and hell are weighed in a balance? Wouldn't you want to make it so it would be easy for people to believe in you? This way, your own children don't have to burn forever in a place you created when they could get them out of. Birth control is evil. God killed Onan for not ejaculating inside the woman he was having sex with. How long after did God kill him? Did he give him an explanation as to why he killed him? Suicide is wrong, but if God just decides to kill you, then that's okay, even without explanation. What happened to the woman? Did she attend the funeral? Was she made aware of the reason why her lover was killed? Were they planning on getting married? Cut your kid in half. God ordered Abraham to saw his own son in half just to prove that he loved God. If God knows all things, wouldn't he know the heart of Abraham? If he's outside of time-space continuum, didn't he know that Abraham was going to make the right choice? So why put him through all that? It doesn't pay to gamble with God. Job lost everything he had because God lost a bet with Satan. If God is everywhere and cannot tolerate wickedness in his presence, how did Satan even propose this bet to him? Are we just pawns in a supernatural poker match between God and Satan? Is Satan equal with God even though he's not omnipotent, omnipresent, and omniscient? Die, fruit tree. Jesus withers a tree because it didn't have any fruit for him. Why would Jesus kill something he created when he could have just located another fruit tree in the area that actually did have fruit? Did Jesus ever end up finding fruit that day? If so, did he give a special reward to the tree that actually did have fruit? Instead of just killing the tree, couldn't he have just created fruit to become on it? Magical bones. God instructs Ezekiel to say very specific words to a pile of bones he came across and brought them back to life. Giants among us. Giants lived on the earth at one time. Why were these people so tall? Were they aliens from another planet like Zecharia Sitchin postulates? Did they have elongated skulls? Were they higher dimensional beings? Why is there no mention of these giants? It seems like an explanation would be in order considering people's eternal souls are dependent on the truth. Horny angels. Angels had sex with, quote, the daughters of men somehow. Weren't they the daughters of God? Was it rape? Did the women consent? What was the result? The Nephilim? How many angels had sex? Did the women know they were angels? Did the angels have sex with women living in China or just Mesopotamia? Do other cultures have any record of this? The Ark of Doom. During transport, Uzzah reached out to stabilize the ark because the ox stumbled and God struck him dead right then and there. Later at Beth Shemesh, either 70 or 50,000 people died as a result of just looking at the ark. Just for the sake of goodness, let's say only 70 people died. Why? Was God angry? How could God get angry? Can he not control his emotions? Weren't their lives valuable? The rapture. Christians will magically vaporize into another dimension one day in what's called the rapture. Will Christians be, quote, caught up to meet the Lord in the air? If so, why would they go up? Is there a direction they have to go? What if some of them are flying planes during the time and planes crash as a result? Does that mean the people in those planes who die aren't valuable? Don't their lives matter? See, the list goes on forever. And you think it's weird to believe in chakras, astral projection, levitation, reincarnation, and remote viewing? Yes, these beliefs are also strange and odd, but they are just as weird as many of the stories in the Bible. I just listed stories that involve some sort of miraculous invention by God into the time-space continuum. There are just as many, if not more, stories that question the moral character of God. The argument from Christians is that without God, fallen man can have no moral compass by which to judge anything. I've been through all the apologetics and studied Christian theology quite extensively. Even though I am fallen, according to biblical scripture, I always knew right from wrong. I knew it even before I was a Christian. You don't need God to have a conscience. It's possible to know what's right and wrong without being a Christian. And I won't list as many of the seemingly unjust and horrific stories in the Bible where innocent people were killed because God decreed it, but I will touch on one of those stories. For 40 years, the children of Israel wandered in the desert in between Egypt and Israel, being taught by God. They needed to learn many lessons during those years. At the end of it, when it was finally time to harvest the land, quote, flowing with milk and honey, God told them to go in and conquer the people there and take the land back. So, that's what they did. They went into the land of Canaan and brutally slaughtered men, women, and children because God told them so. Sound familiar? This is one of the most unjust stories in all of the Bible. What did the women and children in that country do wrong? One day they were going about their businesses and a ruthless army of savages emerges from the desert and rains death and destruction down upon them. Mothers saw their children stabbed right in front of them. Men watched their wives getting beheaded right before their eyes and could do nothing to help. They were powerless. Innocent children watched their parents being stabbed and cut into pieces right in front of their eyes before it was their turn to be murdered. Sitting in contemporary church pews in our modern age, we like to gloss over the horror that took place back then. Somehow, for Christians, all of that was okay because it took place thousands of years ago. But if this happened today, they would be downright outraged. They wouldn't stand for it. They would cry out how unjust it was and how horrible it was to see family members murdered right in front of them. I liken this to people who consume meat but don't want anything to do with the animal dying. They want to go to the grocery store and buy prepackaged meat and take themselves out of the food chain entirely. These people don't want to face the horrific events that lead to the death of others. You must face the stories in the Bible that seem unjust and deal with them head on. You cannot and should not gloss over them and treat them like fairy tales. They are not good stories with life lessons. They're historical fact, according to Christian worldview. But if you take them as allegorical and maybe even fictional, then you can glean some insight from them that could be applicable to your life today. As we have noted, aside from the questionable stories from a moral perspective, there are plenty to choose from that are downright unbelievable. Because Christians have hacked government and social norms, they'll never tell you that because it behooves them to constantly portray themselves as the victims and the underdogs. They have the power to control what we think is rational and logical in our society. Imagine if a social norm was for men to not wear any clothes. You come along and question that idea and politely suggest all men should begin wearing clothing whenever they leave the house. People would look at you strange because the norm in our society is for men to not wear any clothes. As ridiculous as that sounds, that's what's going on here. It just so happens that the dominant worldview that has hijacked our government is Christianity and all of its strange and bizarre customs. Because the framework of reality is now seen as, quote, normal, any other ideology that doesn't fit in with that paradigm is considered fringe. My contention is that Christians don't have the logical right to think Ideas like psychics, palm readers, and New Age philosophies are strange because they themselves are failing to see the forest through the trees. Jesus said it best when he said, "You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." Don't you think? If you'd like to read this particular article, again, you can go to justinstellman.com/A10, where you can comment. You can check out the links that I linked to in the article. And